About 150 kilometers south of Key West, Florida, and 200 kilometers east of Cancun, a massive landmass splits the Caribbean Sea from the Gulf of Mexico and marks the starting point of the 3,500 kilometer long island chain of the Antilles. The largest island of this archipelago, and the 17th largest island across the whole planet, is called Cuba. And while its eccentric leaders have had their fair share of screen time in the past half millennia, the island itself, with its white sandy beaches, towering muggets, tropical rainforests, and cactus savannas, seldom receive the spotlight. Therefore, in this video, we'll take a closer look at the many mountain ranges scattered around the island, the 6 ecoregions which make up the rolling hills and fertile plains in between them, and the mosaic of keys, mangroves, and coral reefs which surround the main island. Chapter 1. The Mountains. At first glance, the island of Cuba appears like a flat stretch drawn between the two seas. But the monotonous plains of central Cuba are only half the truth. With an age of over 250 million years, the island is clearly not shaped by recent tectonic activity, but several mountain ranges have stood the test of time and remind us to this date what immense forces have shaped this island. A total of 4 isolated mountain ranges are standing above the largely flat and fertile plains, turning Cuba's homogenic biota into a diverse tropical landscape, which fosters endemism across many species of flora and fauna. The largest of these mountain ranges are the Nipe-Sagua-Baracoa Mountains, which cover the eastern tip of the island, just north of the infamous Guantanamo Bay. The 3 ranges, which are smoothly transitioning between each other, are receiving much of the moist air coming from the Atlantic Ocean, whose clouds are emptying themselves on the northeastern slopes. With an annual precipitation of 2,700 millimeters per year, it is one of the most precipitous regions of Central America, and despite the thin soil, a prosperous tropical rainforest has developed on the slopes of these mountains. Pico Cristal, the highest point of the mountain range, rises to an elevation of 1,300 meters above the sea level, but it pales in comparison to its southern neighbor. Stretching along Cuba's southeastern coastline for 140 kilometers, the Sierra Maestra Mountains boast Pico Toquino, which with 1,970 meters is the island's tallest peak and one of the highest summits in the Greater Antilles. Standing as a rainforest-covered tower over the Caribbean Sea, this summit is actually the only place in Cuba where snowfall has been recorded, with the winter of the year 1900 bringing this peculiarity into the tropics. The area in and around Pico Toquino has been a hotspot for coffee cultivation since the mid-17th century, and this practice, which has been started by the Spanish and French colonialists, has continued to this date, with 92% of Cuba's coffee coming from the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Each of the Cuban mountain ranges has one particular crop which grows exceptionally well there. The central Escambray Mountains, for example, have been dominated by the cultivation of sugarcane, with the mountains of the southern slope having been the heart of the global sugar industry. Since this industry, however, was built through the blood of 30,000 slaves, not much of this industry is left today, and a large UNESCO heritage site covering the terraced fields and old sugar mills reminds us of this dark part of history. Far on the western side of Cuba, the traditional industry has persisted though, with many international connoisseurs worshipping what Mother Nature is giving us here. Just the right levels of precipitation, sunlight, and temperature, together with a soil that is rich in nitrates, calcium, and manganese, result in the least of the tobacco plant here being hailed as the best in the world. Between these far apart mountain ranges, flat valleys are home to the rest of the Cuban agriculture. But despite this heavy human impact on the landscape, several unique regions still persist, which couldn't be more different from each other, bringing us to Chapter 2, the Ecoregions. According to the Köppen climate classification, which is a system commonly used to subdivide the world into different climatic zones and subzones, nearly the entirety of Cuba is considered tropical savanna, with only the northeastern and western coastal zones behind the mountains being classified as a tropical rainforest. This, however, has not held back the ecoregions from developing and sprawling in many different varieties. The 4 mountain ranges that we've discussed already are largely covered with Cuban moist, dry, and pine forest ecoregions, which all have their unique characteristics based on the fertility and moisture retention ability of the soil, whether they have a distinctive dry and wet season, and by the dominant tree type like broadleaf or deciduous trees. Moving closer to the coast, the more peculiar ecoregions start to emerge, with the southern coastline under the Nipe-Sagua-Baracoa Mountains coming straight out of an alien planet. Since the rain shadow effect creates extreme aridity, the precipitation rate here is the lowest anywhere in Cuba, which has created the so-called Cuban cactus shrub. Succulent plants, meaning plants with the ability to store large amounts of water, are populating the skeletal limestone soil, and despite the less than 800 millimeters of annual precipitation, with dry periods ranging between 9 and 11 months per year, they have formed the basis of an extraordinary ecosystem. The Cuban rock iguana, the pygmy eloith and flower bats have adjusted to this harsh environment, but economic incentives are putting this environment at risk, slowly replacing the endemic thorny bushes with sisal, a plant cultivated for its stiff fibers used in rope manufacturing. Further down the coast to the west, the moisture suddenly becomes abundant, creating the biological opposite of the cactus shrublands. Starting from the shoreline of the Bay of Pigs, which has had its entry into the history books in the last century, the vast Zapata swamp stretches for over 100 kilometers and is the largest representative of the Cuban wetland ecoregion, spanning 4% of Cuba's territory. This vast swamp features caves, sinkholes, depressions, and floodplains that form a dynamic hydrographic network of marshes, freshwater lagoons, and transition zones leading to the Caribbean Sea. Daily tidal movements breathe life into this ecosystem by pushing water masses through the swamp, and seasonal floods regularly cover the savanna of the hinterland, prompting the migration of hundreds of thousands of birds to depart from these wetlands. Within the swamp's marine ecosystem, sharks, crocodiles, and manatees are feeding on the abundance of fish and vegetation, and the most peculiar of birds is soaring through the dense flora. At 1.6 grams, and with wing flaps of up to 80 times per second, the bee hummingbird is rushing from flower to flower and keeping the whole ecosystem running. Much of the remaining coastline of Cuba is covered by the sixth and final ecoregion called the mangrove. Mangroves cover 5.1% of Cuba's land area, accounting for 20% of its remaining forest and protecting over half of its coastline from natural disaster. Particularly, the southern coast is prone to hurricanes and storm surges, which are being slowed down by the kilometer-deep network of mangrove roots, which hold everything in place. While being an important part of the island's sea defense during times of distress from Mother Nature, it also plays a vital role in balancing the mass balance of the ecoregion, since sediments from the receding tidal swells are being trapped in the root network, slowing down coastal erosion and readjusting the seabed level in light of the global sea level rise. As a harbor of life for all sorts of species, the mangroves are the most protected habitat of Cuba, and not just cover large swaths of the main island's coast, but also the many surrounding keys and islets. While the country of Cuba is often only associated with its main island, there are actually thousands of these smaller islands, making Cuba a massive archipelago in itself, and bringing us to the third and final chapter, Chapter 3, the Greater Archipelago. Across its entire territory, the country of Cuba consists of a staggering 4,195 islands, which are grouped into 4 archipelagos off the northern and southern coastline, in the shallow nearshore areas. The archipelago with the most islands is located along the central northeastern coast and accounts for 2,500 islands along its 450-kilometer extent. Many of the larger islands here are connected through a road network consisting of long causeways, which were constructed at the end of last century, now allowing for the development of luxury beach resorts on the white sandy beaches. The eastern and western extents of this archipelago, however, are virtually untouched, harboring much of the Cuban mangrove forests and wetlands. These islands are much younger than the main island, and often just consist of a large pile of sand which sticks out of the sea. Their existence today is thanks to thousands of former coral reefs which teemed the seabed around 130,000 years ago, during a time when the sea level was much higher than today. Upon their death, the coral skeleton trapped free-flowing sediments from the ocean currents, which have then been exposed by the roughly 25 meters of sea level drop that Earth has experienced since then. Today, these keys are threatened by the very mechanic that created them, with significant erosion from wind and water removing the sand, and the rising sea level threatening to drown them again. Luckily, the mangroves are slowing these developments, but it is uncertain exactly how long they'll remain to be appreciated. On the other side of the Cuban main island lie the Queen's Gardens, named by Christopher Columbus in honor of Spain's queen upon this sighting. Known as the Galapagos of the Caribbean, this archipelago boasts some of Cuba's most pristine underwater landscapes, with vibrant coral reefs teeming with groupers, reef sharks, and American crocodiles that attract divers and snorkelers from all over the world. Designated as a nature reserve, these islands have no permanent inhabitants, and strict regulations on tourism and fishing ensure their preservation. In recent decades, fishing has actually been banned outright within the park's boundaries, which has since then turned the marine ecosystem into a fish-spawning machine, benefiting not just the biodiversity, but also the fishing industry. The catch in the deeper waters has increased dramatically since the adaptation of this policy, leading to fishermen and conservationists now pulling on the same rope to preserve this wilderness. 180 kilometers west of these underwater worlds, the Canarreos Archipelago starts stretching for 300 kilometers around the Zapata swamp, and among the 350 islands of this archipelago, Cuba's second largest island lies right in the middle of it. The Isle of Youth, as it was named by Fidel Castro, was formerly known as the Isle of Pines, which today best describes its vegetation. The low-lying ridges of the north are nearly completely covered in Caribbean pine, while the southern plains are covered in a massive swamp similar to the Zapata swamp of the main island, housing an incredible hydrological network and giving a home to hundreds of thousands of migratory birds. All in all, Cuba has an astounding geographical diversity along its thin latitudinal extent, covering misty mountains, idyllic beaches, fertile plains and slopes, and some of the most interesting and best preserved wetlands in the world. I hope you've learned something new on this journey across the island of Cuba. If you want to get notified when the next mini documentary comes out, you can subscribe. And if you want to support the channel even more, you can now also leave a small donation at my Buy Me a Coffee page with the link in the middle of the screen or in the description. See you in the next video. Cheers.